She cut off her son's genitals to protect them from sin forever and guarantee them a place in heaven. On the 4th of July, 1996, Eliezer Whitehead turned 25 years old. He lay in a wooden cradle made from planks from an old barn. The cradle was enormous, almost 2 meters long, and swayed on thick ropes tied to the ceiling beams. He held a rattle in his hands. On his head was a yellowed cotton bonnet with a lace frill. He didn't know what day it was. He didn't know that it was summer outside. He didn't know that he was 25. For him, time had stopped somewhere between milk for breakfast and a lullaby at night. 13 years ago, everything was different. In 1983, 12-year-old Elijah went to school. He loved baseball and Superman comics. On Saturdays, his father took him fishing at Lake Harmon, and they would return home with their catch, smelling of mud and campfire smoke. His mother still smiled back then. She baked apple pie and called him my little man. Then, my father disappeared. Officially, it was an accident on a farm. A tractor overturned in a ditch. A closed coffin at the funeral. No questions from the sheriff. After that, his mother stopped letting Elijah leave the house. First for a week, then for a month. Then school ended forever. She said that the world outside was full of filth, that men were vessels of sin, that his father was burning in hell because he couldn't control his nature, and that she was the only one who could save her son from the same fate. On his 12th birthday, Elijah received a gift. His mother woke him at dawn, took him to the basement, and tied him to a table. She said that today he would cease to be a slave to the flesh, that she would cut the sin out of him, like cutting a rotten apple out of a basket, that it would hurt, but pain was the price of admission to paradise. She had a kitchen knife in her hands. Afterwards, he spent weeks in a fog with a fever and delirium. He asked his father. He asked to be taken to a doctor. But his father was no longer there. Instead of a doctor, his mother came with a bowl of cloudy broth and prayers for his speedy cleansing. When he survived, and he miraculously survived, she said that now he was her angel, pure, sexless, protected from all the temptations of the world. He was given new clothes, a children's jumpsuit stretched at the seams, new food, only milk formula and pureed porridge, a new schedule, wake up at her command, go to bed at her command, not a word without her permission. He was forbidden to speak. At first, he was punished for every word. Then he simply forgot how to do it. Years passed. He grew, but only physically. His mind remained frozen somewhere in that basement, on that table, on the day his mother decided to turn him into an angel. Sometimes, in rare moments of clarity, he remembered the smell of Lake Harmony, his father's laughter, the taste of apple pie. But these memories grew dimmer and dimmer until they became pale shadows, fragments of someone else's life, which he might have only dreamed about. By the age of 25, Elijah Whitehead weighed 47 kilograms. He could not read, although he once had been able to. He did not recognize his own reflection in the mirror. He did not understand what outside meant. He knew only his cradle, his rattle, his milk formula, and his mother's voice, which whispered the same words in his ear every night. You are pure. You are my angel. You are saved. On that very morning of the 4th of July, while Elijah rocked in his cradle, unaware that today was his birthday, his younger brother Isaac was preparing to escape. He was 16 years old, and unlike Elijah, he still remembered what it was like outside. Esther Mary Holloway was born in 1949 in a small town on the border of Ohio and West Virginia. Her father was an itinerant preacher, one of those who traveled through rural communities with a worn Bible and a loud voice, promising salvation to those who would listen. Her mother died in childbirth. Esther became the only child in a house where there were no women, only her father and his faith. Reverend Holloway raised his daughter according to his own system. He believed that the human body was a vessel of sin, and that the flesh was the soul's greatest enemy. There was no television in the house, no radio either. Her father removed all mirrors when Esther turned 7. He said that looking at oneself was vanity, and vanity leads to hell. Every morning began with 3 hours of prayer. Every evening ended with reading the scriptures aloud, until our voices gave out. Food was scarce. My father believed that hunger clears the mind and brings one closer to God. Esther did not attend a regular school. Her father taught her himself, but only what he considered necessary. She knew the book of Leviticus and all of the epistles of the Apostle Paul by heart. But she did not know what a map of the world looked like. She did not know who the president was. She didn't know that somewhere there were children who played in the yard, laughed and ate ice cream just because, without a reason and without permission. When she turned 11, her body began to change. Her father noticed it before she did. He said that a demon was possessing her, that the blood that would soon appear was the mark of the devil, that the only way to protect herself was to kill the flesh before it was too late. The purifications began. Ice baths in the middle of winter, days without food, hours on her knees, on the damp basement floor, until she lost consciousness. Her father stood nearby and read prayers while her lips turned blue from the cold. When she turned 13, he went further. One night, he entered her room. He said he had to check whether a demon had taken possession of her, that it was his paternal duty to ensure that she remained pure. Esther never told anyone what happened next, not once in her entire life. She simply closed that door in her memory and never opened it again. But something remained. The belief that male nature is a curse, that the male body carries within it an evil that cannot be controlled, that the only way to save a man from himself is to take away what makes him a man. This idea did not come immediately. It matured over the years, slowly, like a tumor. At 18, Esther ran away from home. By that time, her father had gone blind from diabetes and couldn't keep her there. She made it to Cincinnati, got a job as a cleaner in a hospital, and rented a room in a women's boarding house. She tried to live like everyone else. She went to church, a normal one, not like her father's. She learned to smile. She learned to talk about the weather and the price of milk. Outwardly, she looked normal, but inside, everything remained the same. Every night she had the same dream. Her father would enter her room, and she would be unable to move. Every time the man looked at her for too long, she felt nauseous. At 27, she met Harold Whitehead. He was a farmer from Claremont County, quiet, uncommunicative, with rough hands and kind eyes. He didn't look at her the way other men did. He didn't try to touch her. On their first date, he just sat across from her and said nothing. And that silence felt safe to Esther. They got married 4 months later. The first few years were almost normal. The farm, the household, the quiet. Harold worked in the fields. Esther ran the house. She almost convinced herself that the past was behind her, that she was an ordinary woman with an ordinary life. Then Elijah was born. When Esther first held her son in her arms, something inside her shifted. She looked at his tiny body, his face, the place between his legs, and felt fear. Not love, not tenderness, fear. She saw him as the man of her future. And in her understanding, a man is someone who enters the room at night when you cannot move. But while Elijah was a baby, she managed. She fed him, bathed him, put him to bed. She did everything mothers do. Only she never looked him in the eyes for too long. 5 years later, Isaac was born, and everything repeated itself. The same fear, the same nausea, the same thought. Harold didn't notice anything, or pretended not to notice. He came home from the fields tired, ate dinner in silence, and went to bed. Sometimes he tried to approach his wife, but she pushed him away, and he backed off. Years passed like this, and then, in 1980, something changed. Elijah was 9 years old. One evening, Esther entered his room without knocking and saw him standing in front of the mirror, without clothes. He was just looking at his body, as all children his age do. But Esther saw something else. She saw her father. She saw that night. She saw everything she had tried to forget. That evening, she did not sleep. She sat in the kitchen and stared into the darkness outside the window. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Male nature is a curse. It must be cut out before it's too late. She realized what she had to do, but first the obstacle had to be removed. On the 12th of October, 1980, Harold Whitehead died. According to the official version, it was an accident. The tractor he was working on overturned into a ravine at the far end of the farm. The body was found only 2 days later. By that time, it was already difficult to determine the exact cause of death. The investigation lasted a week. The county sheriff, 70-year-old Roy Hammond, came to the farm himself. He asked Esther a few questions: where she was on the day she last saw her husband, whether he had any health problems. Esther answered calmly. She said that her husband had left for the fields early in the morning, that she had waited for him for dinner, but he did not return, that she only became concerned the next day. The sheriff looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the two boys, 9-year-old Elijah and 4-year-old Isaac, who were sitting silently at the kitchen table. He wrote something down in his notebook, nodded, and drove away. The case was closed as an accident. No one asked why the tractor's brake system failed on that particular day. No one noticed that the brake hoses had not been torn, but neatly cut. No one noticed that Esther never cried, not at the funeral nor afterwards. In small communities, people don't like to ask unnecessary questions, especially when it comes to a quiet farming family that never bothered anyone. After her husband's death, Esther was left alone with her 2 sons. The farm was paid off, and the insurance money was enough for a modest life. The nearest neighbors lived 3 kilometers away on a dirt road. No one came without an invitation. It was the perfect world for what she had in mind. In the first few months after the funeral, she did nothing. She just watched her sons. She watched them grow. She watched their bodies change. She watched them gradually turn into what she feared most. She started keeping a diary. She wrote down her thoughts, at first in fragments, then in whole pages. She wrote about the demons of the flesh, about salvation through pain, about her mission to stop evil before it had a chance to take root. She reread her father's Bible, the very same one, worn and tattered with notes in the margins. She found passages that confirmed she was right. She ignored everything else. A system gradually took shape in her mind, a logic that only made sense to her. Men sin because of their nature. Nature is found in the body. If you remove the part of the body that is responsible for sin, a person will become pure, safe, saved. She thought about her father and hated him, but at the same time she repeated his words. She used his methods. She became him, without even realizing it. In 1981, Elijah turned 10. She was 2 years away from the milestone she had set for herself. Esther began to prepare. She studied medical reference books from the town library, the few that were there. She learned how to sew on old towels. She bought surgical instruments through a mail-order catalog, supposedly for slaughtering livestock. She stocked up on antiseptics, bandages, and morphine, which she traded with an old veterinarian for 3 sacks of corn. She furnished the basement. She put in a table. She hung up a lamp. She cleared away everything unnecessary and waited. She waited for the day when her eldest son would cross the line beyond which, in her opinion, it would be impossible to save him any other way. On the 12th of March, 1983, Elijah turned 12 years old. Esther woke him up at dawn. That day, the last thing that still connected her to the normal world broke inside her. She felt no doubt. She felt no fear. Only a cold, clear certainty that she was doing the right thing. Afterwards, when it was all over, when her son lay unconscious and she stitched up his wound with trembling but steady hands, she felt at peace for the first time in many years. She saved him. Now he will never become like her father. He will never enter someone's room at night. He will never cause harm. He will become an angel, her angel. And a few years later, the same thing awaited Isaac. After the first operation, Esther Whitehead developed a system. She did not act chaotically. Every step she took was carefully considered. Every decision was based on an internal logic that became increasingly sophisticated over the years. The first rule: isolation. During the year 1983, she completely cut off her family from the outside world. She disconnected the telephone line, citing economic reasons. She moved the postbox to the beginning of the driveway, almost a kilometer from the house, and checked it herself once a week. Any letters that might raise questions were burned in the stove. She took Elijah out of school immediately after the operation. She wrote to the district education department, stating that she was transferring her son to homeschooling for religious reasons. In Ohio in the 1980s, this required almost no verification. All that was needed was a statement and a formal lesson plan, which no one ever checked. Elijah's teacher, Mr. Davis, who taught at Claremont County Primary School, later recalled this boy. He was quiet, a little withdrawn, but capable. He loved to read. He was good at drawing. Once, he drew a picture of his family, his mother, father, himself, and his little brother. Everyone was smiling. The sun was shining in the corner of the page. Mr. Davis said he tried to contact the family when Elijah stopped coming to class. He called the phone number, but no one answered. He wrote a letter, but received no reply. He drove to the farm, but the gate was closed and the dogs were barking so loudly that he didn't dare go in. He informed the headmaster. The headmaster said that homeschooling was the legal right of parents, and the school could not interfere. No one asked about Elijah Whitehead anymore. The second rule: control over the body. After the operation, Esther completely changed her eldest son's lifestyle. She decided that now that he had been cleansed, he needed to be returned to a state of innocence. And innocence, in her understanding, meant infancy. She began feeding him only milk formula and pureed porridge. She removed everything from his room that reminded him of his age: books, toys, clothes. She replaced his bed with a cradle. First a small one, then, when he grew up, she built a large one out of planks. She dressed him in baby clothes, rompers, bonnets, booties. When ready-made clothes no longer fit, she began to sew herself. Enlarged copies of baby outfits. He was forbidden to speak. At first, she punished him for every word he uttered, depriving him of food, locking him in a dark closet, forcing him to kneel for hours. Then the punishments became unnecessary. Elijah simply fell silent. By the age of 15, he could only utter incoherent sounds. By 18, he could hardly understand speech directed at him. His mind, deprived of stimulation, communication, and development, gradually faded away. Esther considered this a success. Her angel was becoming purer and purer. Rule 3: ritual. She wasn't just maiming. She was creating a religion. In the basement, behind a secret door hidden by shelves of canned goods, Esther had set up an altar. A wooden table covered with a white tablecloth, candles, icons cut out of religious magazines, and glass jars of formaldehyde. After the operation on Elijah, she kept what she had cut off. She placed it in a jar, labeled it with his name and the date, and put it on the altar. She called it freedom from sin. The date of the operation was marked in her diaries as the day of purification, Every year on that day, she would go down to the basement, light candles, and pray, thanking God for giving her the strength to save her son. When Isaac turned 12, this happened in 1988, she underwent a second operation. By then, she already had experience. She acted more confidently, more precisely. Isaac screamed less than Elijah, perhaps because she had calculated the morphine dose better. Recovery was faster, infection was avoided. A second jar appeared on the altar. But something went wrong with Isaac. Unlike his older brother, he did not break completely. Something inside him resisted. He obeyed his mother's orders, wore children's clothes, ate milk formula, but there was still something alive in his eyes, a spark that Esther could not extinguish. He memorized, he observed, he waited. Esther sensed this and tightened her control. She let him out of the room less often. She installed locks on all the windows. She nailed shut the attic hatch. She checked every corner of the house, every crack through which he could see the outside world. But sometimes the outside world came to them. In 1991, a social worker from the District Family Services Department came to the farm. Her name was Linda Mason. She was 34 years old and had been working in child protection for 8 years. The visit was routine, part of the program to check on families practicing homeschooling. 3 or 4 such checks were carried out in the district each year, and they were usually a formality to make sure that the children were alive, healthy, and receiving some kind of education. Linda arrived without warning, as was customary. She parked at the gate, walked up the driveway, climbed the steps, and knocked. Esther opened the door a few minutes later. She was wearing a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back into a tight bun. She smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Linda introduced herself, showed her ID, and explained the purpose of her visit. Esther listened calmly. She said that the children were busy with their lessons, but she could show her the teaching materials. She led Linda into the living room. Textbooks and notebooks lay neatly stacked on the table. Next to them was a class schedule written in calligraphic handwriting. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect, thought Linda. But she didn't say it out loud. She asked to see the children. Esther hesitated for a second. Barely noticeable, but Linda caught it. Then she nodded and left the room. 10 minutes later, she returned with 2 boys. Linda expected to see teenagers. The older one should have been around 20, the younger one 15. Instead, she saw 2 boys wearing identical children's jumpsuits. The older one, tall, thin, with a vacant stare, was holding a teddy bear. The younger one was looking at the floor and did not raise his eyes. Linda tried to talk to them. She asked their names, what they were studying, whether they liked living on the farm. The older one did not respond. He simply looked through her as if she did not exist. The younger one muttered something indistinct, perhaps his name or perhaps just a sound. Esther explained that both sons are special. They have developmental delays from birth. Doctors can't do anything, so she takes care of them herself, at home, where they are calm and safe. Linda looked at the boys. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But she couldn't figure out what it was. She wrote in her notebook, "The children appear healthy. No signs of physical abuse were found. The mother claims that both children have congenital developmental disorders. A follow-up visit in 6 months is recommended." The return visit never happened. 3 months later, Linda was transferred to another district. Her case was handed over to a colleague who was overloaded with work and never got around to visiting the Whiteheads. The folder with the report was filed away and remained there for 5 years, until the day it was taken out again. The Whiteheads' neighbor, Dorothy Cranston, lived 3 kilometers to the east. She was in her 60s, ran a small dairy farm, and rarely ventured beyond the nearest town. She hardly spoke to Esther, nor did she want to. Something about this woman seemed wrong to her, too quiet, too calm, too empty. But one day in the summer of 1993, Dorothy happened to see something strange. She was driving along a country road past the Whitehead farm. The fence there was old and had gaps in it. Through one of them, Dorothy noticed two figures in the yard. Boys. No, young men. But they were dressed like children. One was sitting on the ground, digging in the sand. The other was just standing, looking up at the sky, with something resembling a rattle in his hand. Dorothy stopped the car. She stared for several minutes, not understanding what she was seeing. Then Esther came out of the house. She didn't notice the car behind the bushes. She approached her sons, said something, Dorothy couldn't hear what, and led them back inside. Dorothy drove on. All the way she thought about what she had seen. Grown men in children's clothes, with rattles, on an isolated farm in the middle of the forest. She could have called the police. She could have reported it to social services. She could at least have told someone, but she did nothing. Later, when giving evidence to investigators, she cried. She said she didn't want to get involved in other people's business. She thought maybe they had some kind of illness. She had no idea how bad things were. The investigator wrote down her words and did not respond. By the mid-1990s, the Esther system had reached its peak. The house became a closed universe, where she was a goddess and her sons were angels created in her image of innocence. Elijah was 20 by then. He had completely lost touch with reality. He lived in a cradle, ate from a bottle, did not recognize his own reflection. Sometimes he smiled for no reason. Sometimes he cried, also for no reason. His mind had turned into a blank slate with nothing left but vague shadows. Isaac was 16, and unlike his brother, he was still here. He learned to pretend. He obeyed his mother's every command. He wore children's clothes. He ate baby formula. He didn't speak when she was around. But when she left, he thought. He remembered fragments of the past. He remembered his father, vaguely, as if in a dream. He remembered the world outside, the trees, the road, the sky, which he could only see through boarded-up windows. He remembered that once everything had been different, and he knew he had to get out. He studied the house, every board, every lock, every crack. He noticed that the ventilation window in the basement was closed, only with a rusty latch, not a lock. He noticed that his mother took sleeping pills in the evenings after long prayers. He noticed that on Thursdays she slept more soundly than on other days. He planned his escape for 2 years. He waited 2 years for the right moment. On the 4th of July, 1996, that moment arrived. On the 4th of July, 1996, at 2 o'clock in the morning, Isaac Whitehead opened a ventilation window in the basement. Her mother fell asleep after praying for hours. The sleeping pills she took on Thursdays had a stronger effect than usual, perhaps because she was tired. Isaac had been waiting for this moment for 2 years. He squeezed through the narrow opening, tearing the skin on his ribs on the rusty metal. He fell to the ground on the other side of the wall. He lay motionless for a few seconds, breathing in the night air. The first fresh air he had breathed in 8 years. Then he ran away. He didn't know where he was running to. He didn't know where the nearest house was. He just moved away from the farm, across the field, through the forest, across the ravine, until he reached the motorway. He was found by Walter Jenkins, a local farmer, at 4:30 in the morning. Jenkins was driving to the market in Batesville and nearly hit a boy standing in the middle of the road in a dirty child's overalls. He stopped, got out of the car, and tried to talk to him. The boy did not answer. He only made strange sounds, something between moaning and crying, and he pointed to his body, to the lower part. Jenkins realized that something was seriously wrong. He put the boy in his car and drove him to the nearest police station. The duty officer called the sheriff. The sheriff called the doctor. The doctor examined Isaac and came out of the office white as a sheet. By 7 o'clock in the morning, A group of 6 people had arrived at the Whiteheads' farm. 2 police officers, an investigator, a doctor, and 2 social service workers. Esther did not resist. When the police entered the house, she was sitting in her bedroom folding her children's clothes. Carefully, methodically, as if she were packing for a trip. When asked where her eldest son was, she calmly pointed to the door at the end of the corridor. Behind the door, the police found Elijah. A 25-year-old man lay in a giant wooden cradle, secured with soft straps. He held a rattle in his hands. He wore a bonnet on his head. He did not understand what was happening. He just looked at the people who had entered and smiled. One of the policemen went out onto the porch and threw up. Then they found the cellar. Behind the shelves with canned food, a secret door was discovered. Behind it was an altar, a white tablecloth, candles, icons, and 4 glass jars with formaldehyde, neatly arranged in a row. 2 were labeled with the names of sons. The other 2 were labeled with the names of babies who had died many years ago. 12 notebooks lay nearby, Esther's diaries, 15 years of entries, dates, descriptions, prayers. A detailed account of each cleansing, how her sons cried, and how she interpreted it as the demons leaving. The investigator flipped through a few pages and closed the notebook. Later, he would say in court that in 20 years of work, he had never seen anything like it. When she was arrested, Esther uttered only one sentence. She told the sheriff that he had come too late, that the devil would find no refuge here, that she had already locked her children's souls away in purity. She was taken away in handcuffs. She did not resist. She did not cry. She just looked out of the police car window and smiled. In March 1997, Esther Mary Whitehead appeared before the court. The defense insisted on insanity. 3 psychiatrists concluded that the defendant suffered from severe delusional disorder with religious content. But the jury decided otherwise. Esther was found sane and guilty on all counts. 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. She sat motionless as the sentence was read out. When the judge finished reading, she simply nodded, as if she had heard the weather forecast. Elijah Whitehead was never able to adapt to life outside the farm. He was placed in a psychiatric clinic in Columbus, where he spent the rest of his days. The staff recalled that he never spoke, but sometimes smiled at the nurses. He died in 2009 of pneumonia. He was 38 years old. Isaac underwent lengthy rehabilitation. He relearned how to speak, read, and live among people. By the age of 30, he was able to find a job and rent his own flat. But the scars, both external and internal, remained with him forever. In 2014, Esther Whitehead died in a prison hospital. She was 65 years old. According to the guards, she behaved calmly until her last day and prayed for her angels every evening. The line between love and violence sometimes runs where you least expect it, in a mother's prayer over her baby's cradle.